point, competition is so fierce in Amazon, you have to have a close eye on what your competitors are doing.
All right, welcome to the webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jake Saratian here on the Service of the Sun, Austin, Texas. And today, this is for all the brand owners out there that are investing a lot of time and money into advertising optimization, listing optimization, inventory management, but aren't really allocating enough resources to account protection. Because as you know, for every day that your account gets shut down or suspended, your business loses out on thousands of dollars in profit that your competitors will gladly take advantage of. This is why we brought in someone who works on Amazon suspensions all day, every day. Chris McCabe is an ex-Amazonian who helps sellers communicate with Amazon to protect and save their businesses. During his time at Amazon, Chris was the man responsible for evaluating seller account performance and enforcing Amazon's policies. So armed with that experience, he launched E-commerce Chris to teach others how to think like Amazon to protect your accounts. Chris, thanks for being here today. How's it going?
Good. How are you doing? Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Yeah, of course. Thanks for being here. So before we get started, guys, just want to let you know this webinar will be split into two parts. Up first, Chris will share 10 of his top tips to help you avoid account suspensions, followed by 6 more tips for quickly reinstating your account after a suspension. And trust me, you'll want to watch both parts because as you'll see, these suspensions like to come at some of the worst times possible. And most of the time, the account that got suspended did nothing wrong. In fact, Brandon Young, one of our good friends and partners here at Jungle Scout, just recently had his account suspended over a false claim from one of his competitors. Now, thankfully, Chris was able to step in and help Brandon quickly reinstate his account, but I want you to just listen in to this ridiculous story and realize that this can happen to anyone.
So my account was just suspended. My Amazon account that does over $20 million a year was just taken down because of false IP complaints. Now, they claim it's counterfeit despite being my brand, my product, not using their trademark, their logo anywhere, yet Amazon has sided with them. So I had to open a case and say, look, they're pointing to a logo that we don't use. It is our brand. And Amazon just keeps with this generic response of, can you show us, get a letter from the rights owner saying you have the right to sell this? I am the rights owner. I have the right to sell my own brand. What is happening? What are you even talking about? The response back from the guy that filed it from my attorney who talked to their attorney was, I gave the example of T-ball. He's like, yeah, if you want to just not use the word T anywhere, then we'll agree to remove it. But I'm not going to let you do that. Like, I'm not going to give you the rights to a generic word that everyone has the right to, that you clearly don't own and don't have the rights to. Like, I'm not going to give you that right.
Now, thankfully, Chris, when you and I first talked, you mentioned that nearly every type of suspension is preventable, even the ones that come after a false complaint from one of your angry competitors. So, Chris, I want to maybe set up a scenario here. If I were to come to you right now and say, you know, my business does 6 or 7 figures a month on Amazon. I'm storing thousands of units in FBA. I cannot afford getting suspended. What are some things that I can do right now to protect my account?
I like how you mentioned angry competitors. That's a good place to start since abuse from competitors is more or less at an all-time high right now. So the first thing people need to do is, well, I guess there are basic things you can do like locking down your intellectual property, make sure you're not vulnerable for anyone to challenge your trademark or try to create an abuse case in any particular way, saying that you use their design or you use their copyrighted images. Obviously, you don't want anyone saying you use their trademark terms, anything like that. But keep an eye on competition. Don't just have tunnel vision where you're just looking at what you're working on, trying to sell more, trying to pay attention to ads and A+ content and ignoring everything else going on in your category, because that's a mistake. Maybe 5 years ago or 4 years ago, you could do things like that. Now you have to be hyper conscious of not just 1 or 2 main competitors that you might have and what they might be doing in terms of attacking you or trying to make life difficult for you, but you may also need to look at their listings and their way of operating, doing business, because you might have valid reports that you can make against them for listing rules, for example, that they are violating, because listing violations are rampant. You definitely need to at least be aware if your competition is breaking the rules, because they'll have an unfair competitive advantage over you if they're breaking rules and getting away with it. But even beyond that, if you're suspicious that they might be buying from you. If you're looking at the same kinds of negative product reviews over and over, and it looks like they're all coming from buyers, with the same kind of characteristics or the same background, pay attention to that, right? Amazon doesn't necessarily spend all day looking into who might be attacking you, but try to compile some facts and some timelines and some bulleted lists of sequences of these things, even if you just use it later, not today, not tomorrow, but next week or next Prime Day or next Black Friday, Cyber Monday, because at this point, competition is so fierce in Amazon, you have to have a close eye on what your competitors are doing, even just to anticipate what they might do to you, which is kind of a tricky conversation to have. Also, in terms of dealing with attacks from competitors, where they might be attacking your intellectual property or leaving you fake reviews, make sure you understand the difference between disputing and writing a plan of action or a POA. Amazon should only be asking you for a plan of action when you have found that their investigation was accurate, it's complete, and you did do something wrong. And you do have to appeal something with the 3-part structure in terms of root causes analysis, immediate steps taken to solve the problem, and then finally the section future prevention to avoid problems in the future. The issue becomes whether or not you dispute it. If you're disputing it, there is no plan of action. Sellers are getting that wrong a lot of the time. A dispute is you flagged me for something, whether it's intellectual property or whether it's item quality complaints, item defect complaints. We don't have those kinds of complaints. We've been erroneously flagged for this. A competitor bought from us, looks like an abuse case. We will report whoever is attacking us later. For now, we don't want to appeal with a plan of action. We want to dispute this. That's usually what sellers need to do first. One basic point that sometimes people look past and forget is in terms of account health, keeping your metrics in range. Sometimes people are so focused on other things they don't see when their canceled orders are slipping. Maybe they didn't get a shipment they thought they were going to. They have to cancel orders instead of fulfilling them, or just their order defect rates creep above 1%. Anytime you have a metrics issue and you don't deal with it right away and it becomes a problem that lingers for a period of time, it's hurting your account health, right? And at any moment at that point, you could get a call from account health reps saying, you're out of range. What are you doing to fix it? They might actually ask you for a POA, which is a plan of action, basically an improvement plan, right? You're canceling too many orders. You're having too many complaints, too many item defect issues, too many people saying the quality isn't there. Maybe it's just as simple as you had a bad batch of product, which is another one that we're going to be talking about here in a second in terms of pulling problematic product. But it's not a given that your metrics will, take care of themselves. You definitely have to keep an eye on it, babysit those, and make sure that if you're ever out of range, whether it's order defect rate on its entirety or canceled orders or any individual metric that's out of whack, responding to customer messages on time, for example. Sometimes people have their main customer service team or person go on vacation for a few days and that lapses and they're not answering messages that quickly. So those are the key, components that you don't want to forget. Regarding old problematic products, if you have an underperformer, don't just try to say, we're going to sell through the inventory and we'll deal with it later, even if we get a bunch of bad reviews, even if we get a bunch of bad feedback for this product. I think at this point, most sellers don't do that. That's something maybe 3-4 years ago, people would try to sell through all their FBA inventory and then worry about fixing what's wrong. If you've got a bad product that is underperforming because it's not working or because it's in poor condition, depends on the product, obviously. If it's electronics and the items are duds, you have to pull those out immediately, of course. That's obvious. But if you're getting a lot of consistent complaints or clusters of complaints, well, guess what? That's what Amazon uses to evaluate the strength of that ASIN, the viability of those sales, whether or not they should take it down. And of course, there's a difference between Amazon sending you a message or performance notification that says, take a look at this one, look at this ASIN, we're reviewing it, but they haven't suspended it, right? They're just telling you, giving you a heads up that there's problems there, there's complaints coming in. If there's numerous complaints, they're probably going to suspend the ASIN for too many defects or too many quality complaints. They might just ask you for an invoice to make sure that you're using the same manufacturer you were before, or you're using a manufacturer that they can identify themselves with the information you provide, and make sure you have the supply chain documentation that Amazon's looking for, quality testing documentation, certificates of analysis. At any moment, whether you're a brand owner or a reseller, whatever kind of seller you are, at any moment, Amazon could show up saying, we need to look at your supply chain documentation, not just the invoices, but information about your supplier, to see if they are a established, reliable, trustworthy supplier for this kind of item. Because if they're not, and it looks like they're just dabbling in manufacturing a certain kind of product, well, maybe that adds up. Maybe that makes sense to the product quality teams in terms of why that ASIN is attracting lots of complaints, why it's performing poorly. They may even suppose that you struck a deal with a certain factory in China or wherever they might be to get it done cheaper, but that company, that manufacturer isn't that good at making that kind of product. So it's really just a question of, are you going to continue to sell and manufacture that product at all? Or are you switching factories? Should you be doing that right away today? Is it something that's a minor defect? Is it a major defect? All of these things are things that you want to stay vigilant to, just to avoid having your ASIN flagged. Because the more often you give Amazon an opportunity to look at your account, look at your ASINs, the more people are, when I was working in seller performance, we used to say the more times you're touching an account, the more times they're going in there looking at it, looking at the annotations, looking at how many times they have to review your listings, review complaints. If there's any consistency to any of this, then that's a problem, because it means they probably could have taken an enforcement action against you before. They never did it. Well, then they're going to make sure they definitely do it today. Otherwise, what's the point? They'll send you a warning, or they won't take your ASIN away, and you won't have any incentive to fix what's wrong. Finally, in terms of our discussion around avoidance of suspensions in part one here, do not give Amazon any easy layup, to use a basketball analogy, any easy reasons to suspend you for breaking policies. Product inserts, reviews abuse, product review solicitation, those are some well-known easy ones to identify. You definitely don't want to color outside the lines. I understand there's a lot of mixed content out there in terms of what you can do, what you can't do. Make sure you're not just listening to marketing or promotional gurus and people who are revenue generators, who are just looking at increasing sales, who have no real concept of compliance or risk or potential consequences of bad inserts, bad messaging to buyers, soliciting buyers with QR codes, or gathering up their emails and then pummeling them with free gifts and offers in exchange for positive reviews, or giving product away, which of course Amazon assumes, even if you don't ask for a review, Amazon assumes that if you give enough product away, you'll get enough 5-star reviews out of that. The yield will be better reviews than worse, more often than not, positive reviews than negative reviews. They know that, you know that, we know that, everyone knows it. So don't give them an opportunity to take action on you. Another reason not to break terms of service or to make obvious listing violations or behavior/policy violations is because your competitors are watching you, right? All the time. If they're smart, and if they realize that they could report you for anything that could get you taken down, they could get a windfall in sales, of course, if you get suspended. So they're watching you. Just assume they're watching you. I don't mean to sound like, kind of a Orwellian, paranoid Big Brother state here. I just see this in experiences that we have with brands that come to us that find their competitors are breaking policies. They want help from us to report their competition, or they come to us because they've been flagged for breaking rules themselves. Probably more often than not, a competitor reported them to Amazon, which, by the way, is completely valid to do as long as it's a valid complaint, as long as they're not making something up or trying to fake that you're breaking policies. And, we can talk about that perhaps in terms of reinstatement strategies in part two. I know there are lots of people who are trying to make it look like you're doing things wrong when you're not. But for the purposes of part one and avoiding suspensions, make sure you have a compliance arm or an employee or a manager within your operation who consistently monitors policy pages, who understands policy changes, policy updates, but also interprets policies correctly. If you ever need help in terms of interpreting policies the right way versus the wrong way, or with anything tied to compliance that could result in an account takedown, let us know. We're always around.
Yeah, Chris, that's really interesting that you say these things can happen both by the fault of the brand owner, but also by the fault of not the brand owner, maybe by a malicious seller, competitor that is telling Amazon that you've done something wrong and you actually didn't do something wrong. I've heard countless horror stories from close friends and partners that they are losing thousands of dollars every single day around these big days like Prime Day, Q4, because of the competitors saying something that is false, but Amazon's taking their side on it anyways. And so in that case, but also in the case where, the brand owner has some level of responsibility as well, once you get slammed, with the hammer, what are some actionable tips here that anyone watching can take away that you can quickly get reinstated? How do you speak to Amazon?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And sometimes Amazon just makes their own mistakes too, by the way. It's not just a competitor lighting the fuse and getting Amazon looking at your account the wrong way. I mean, Amazon has automation errors, policy enforcement errors. They have a lot of communication problems internally between teams. And maybe that's not something I mentioned or dwelled on so much in part one, but it is very true that if Amazon flat out makes a mistake, that directly impacts your approach to reinstatement strategy, simply disputing the fact that Amazon took the proper action. As time goes on, as the marketplace gets more complex, as there are more and more reasons that an ASIN or an account could be suspended, Amazon will be making more mistakes. They will be making more AI-generated mistakes or bot mistakes. We see this all the time with listings that are simply flagged improperly, and Amazon sometimes does push back and will say, no, this is a good flag, we did this properly, and you might have to escalate things accordingly. But whether it's initiated by an Amazon error or a competitor trying to, light the fuse and get you taken down, or even if it's just buyers, I want to also emphasize buyers make mistakes. They misinterpret product. They buy items that they don't read the detail page in detail. That happens all the time. Sometimes buyers inadvertently, not out of malice, but just because of their ignorance in the shopping process or not identifying the specs of your product, which don't match up with what they need for whatever reason. Buyers can get your ASINs and your account taken down too, even with just a handful of complaints. It's kind of amazing that Amazon's algorithms and their machine learning haven't developed to the point where they can kind of screen out the less reliable complaints from buyers as just user errors, right? Someday in the future, maybe that'll be the case. But for now, Amazon still takes complaints that sometimes the buyers aren't even talking about your order, your product. They're talking about a totally different item. And we work with people to get negative reviews removed for that reason all the time. You would think Amazon could screen it out. If you're not selling footwear and the complaints about footwear, that's not something that you should have to deal with. Amazon should be able to screen that out for you, right? This is all fodder for a dispute, which is whether it's through Seller Central or an email appeal from the primary email on your account. You are appealing it by disputing that an improper action was taken. It's a bad flag, bad automation, policy enforcement investigators took the wrong action for whatever reason, human error, misunderstanding of the situation. And like you noted, there are competitors that know how to phrase things a certain way when they're attacking you and buying from you. They know how to say things like, using this sent me to the hospital, or I had a headache for a week, anything that indicates an injury or they had a terrible experience with the product. They know how to game the system, right? How to trick Amazon's algorithms. Again, maybe 2, 3, 4 years from now, machine learning, AI will catch up with these things and these basic tricks won't be as successful. But right now, with all the progress that's happening, Amazon is still kind of in the dark ages when it comes to interpreting a real complaint versus a bogus complaint. Well, what that means for you is the appeal process might seem harder, but it could actually be easier because you don't have to craft a plan of action. You don't have to admit to having done something wrong. You don't have to admit to having a faulty product. You can appeal it saying, we're disputing this. We went through our voice of the customer. We went through all the return reasons. Amazon has access to the same data you do. You can show them there's no history of this. There are no consistent patterns of these types of complaints. This is a one-off. Maybe it's from somebody buying from us, maybe not. But the bottom line is We source these from a reliable manufacturer. We quality control. Our QC is top notch. We have factory inspections and investigations that we conduct on our side for due diligence. There is no there. There's nothing here that indicates there's a problem with this product and you can dispute it. If they're not taking your dispute, and if you're on solid ground, if you're not just blowing smoke trying to make it all go away, there is an escalation process that you can use. And I'll talk about when to escalate and how to escalate in a minute. But just wanted to talk about POAs, which is a plan of action, for a second. You can call account health and find out if indeed you're at fault, if indeed you have to get that ASIN reinstated with a plan of action. They've specifically asked you for a plan of action. Don't volunteer one out of turn if they haven't mentioned it, just because you think a POA is an appeal. Those two things are not synonymous with each other. If the messaging, or if an account health rep prompts you to write a plan of action, and if it gets rejected, before you send in the second one or the third one, whatever the issues might be, again, quality of the product, defective item complaints, even if it's intellectual property based or something else, buyers misunderstanding the product by misreading the detail page and so forth, make sure that you speak with USA based account health reps, never any reps in India. If you're not getting US reps, call later in the day, whether it's Eastern time zone, Pacific time zone, doesn't matter, call late afternoon. Get somebody in the United States, get them to tell you why an appeal's been rejected, denial notes, rejection reasons, what's wrong with the plan of action. Generally, if they just say weak, vague things like the root causes weren't strong enough, the future prevention section is too weak, if they give you these kind of vague generalities like weak or strong, but they don't give details as to why, if they don't speak to specific bulleted points on your plan of action, or if it just sounds like no investigators in seller performance, my former teams, even read it, if there are no annotations, that's a good indication that no one really read it, right? You would think that there'd be quality assurance. You would think there'd be some follow-up process inside Amazon to audit the investigative quality. And in a perfect world, that would exist. Nowadays, it seems like no one's ever really paying attention to whether or not these investigations happen. And a lot of times, whether they reject your plan of action, reject your dispute, or anything else, a lot of times there are no annotations that indicate somebody at Amazon read the appeal at all, which is very disheartening and discouraging. So before you submit second and third POAs, make sure that you understand the call to account health. Perhaps they do have a valid reason why it was denied, but find out what that reason was before you write a third and fourth and fifth generation of a plan of action. Now to spend a couple minutes talking about escalations. There are definite do's and don'ts here. We could spend 30, 40 minutes talking about just escalations, but to boil it down into a few minutes, most people are escalating either because they haven't seen a response at all from Amazon. They have gotten responses, but they're all copy and paste, generic denials, and account health doesn't even have any real understanding of why you're getting denied. Maybe it hasn't been reviewed properly. Maybe the reps see annotations on your account. They can't tell you exactly what the annotations are, but they kind of give you the gist of it, right? As if the investigation never really happened, or it was conducted by a rookie seller performance team member, and they didn't really know what they were doing, and they didn't really have any justification for rejecting your appeal. That alone is a basis for an escalation. Amazon ignoring you entirely and never responding to you is the basis for another type of escalation. Does it mean that you escalate every hour, every day, all the time, and you just send it everywhere you can think of? You write to Jeff, who no longer works at Amazon. You send it to Andy Jassy. You send it all over the place. No, that's a spam approach that we would never recommend. The more you spam them, the less likely they are to read anything properly. The right way to escalate is to keep it factual, keep it tight to a couple of paragraphs. Make sure your best communicator, your best writer is putting a detailed bulleted list of where you've been, what you've sent. Did you send them things that they asked for already in the past and they rejected it and they asked you for the same things again? Well, that probably means they didn't read it, right? Did you get rejected and account health reps don't give you good reasons why it was rejected? Cite that front and center in your escalation. Account health reps, you can almost make it sound like they agreed with you. that you shouldn't have been rejected, that you were rejected without cause, that you pursued due diligence to find out exactly what else you could do to put in your appeal. No one at Amazon knew. No one at Amazon told you what was missing. Well, that led you to the conclusion that maybe nothing was missing. You need a senior executive or a manager, somebody at least mid-level management or above, to review your appeal and tell you what's missing, what's gone wrong in the appeals process. Because often, I'll tell you what, a properly written escalation sent to the right place, maybe not through Seller Central, maybe to somebody specific from the primary email on your account, but that escalation sent to the right place could resolve the problem right there. You might actually get the ASIN reinstated or your account back up without even having to do a second or third escalation based on whatever revisions they claim you were missing on that appeal. So keep it specific. Don't make vague promises. We'll do this better. We'll do that better. Make sure you're very factual. You're using evidence. If you're referring to documentation, whether it's an invoice from your manufacturer or you're referring to how long they've made these products for you, be specific with details, links to the manufacturer website. We have a lot of cases where people have been suspended for the same thing 2 or 3 times in 2 or 3 months. So definitely take them back through the case history. You flagged us for this last month. We wrote this appeal. You accepted it. And now you're flagging us for the same thing again. Is that because we didn't correct something on our side, or is it because something misfired on Amazon's side? All of this is worthy of an escalation. You just have to put some time and effort into where it goes and not just send it to everyone you can think of at Amazon, because obviously that doesn't necessarily work. And one other point I'd like to make while we're on this escalation topic, don't start emailing Amazon executives or S-team execs, mid-level management, whoever they are, asking them to review things either personally or have their direct reports review it without a cause. Don't just say, well, we're tired of being suspended and we're cranky and we don't think your teams are reading anything, so we want you to do it instead. That's the beginning of an escalation. That should not be the be-all, end-all of the escalation. Make sure you lay out and make a case for, we did go through proper channels. Here they are, bullet, 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 date, date, date. We didn't either get any answer back at all, or we didn't get any indication that it was taken seriously, that anyone conducted any sort of significant review. We got a copy and paste message back. And when we called account health, or when we dealt with our account manager, if you have one, in the paid account management SAS core program or whoever it might be, we didn't get any indication that our appeal was properly reviewed. The reason you are asking them to look at it, or one of their direct reports, obviously S-team executives aren't sitting around all day waiting for the next escalation email to come in. The reason you're asking them for help, and yes, you do need a very specific reason to ask them for help, is because it's gone on too long. You've given them what they wanted. You haven't seen any sign that they reviewed it properly, and there's a breakdown internally on Amazon's side. And on top of that, you were willing to revise your appeal if needed, but you were never given any appropriate criteria with which to base that revision or those revisions to an appeal. You were willing to do it. Show them in the past where you expressed willingness to make modifications if needed, but you were not willing or able to make random modifications, random edits, just to appease the Amazon appeal gods, which of course I'm paraphrasing there. But you understand what I'm saying. You're writing a short message. You can attach your appeal to it. You can have a POA with it, plan of action if you need to. But the first paragraph or two are directed strictly to that person and treating them as a unique audience. If you send S-team executives appeal emails or escalations that include content that anyone who reports to them can look in your account and see that it's the same spammy escalation that you sent to Jeff or executive seller relations or even via Seller Central, they will not take you seriously. And you will have blown a good, solid, unique opportunity to get it fixed, possibly that day, possibly as soon as they have read it or have delegated it to one of the managers that report directly to them. Don't burn those bridges. Don't waste those escalation paths with low quality content. The more you do that, the less likely they are even to read your emails, let alone to take the content in that appeal seriously. And there are a lot of things where you do need expert eyes on the issue before you can even think of appealing. You might even need an assessment, compliance work done, a review by somebody or a team who's used to doing this day in, day out for years. If it's something new to you, if Amazon's asking you for things and you're not sure what to provide, either attachments wise or other types of pieces to the appeal that you can't figure out, you might need an expert size on that. We've been consulting on this type of work for 10 years, and e-commerce Chris has been around that long, coming up to our 10th anniversary this fall. So always easy to shoot us a quick email at support, SUPPORT @ecommercechris.com. And you can put in the subject line of an email that you listened to this Jungle Scout webinar and that you had questions on something you heard me say, or that you have a problem that relates directly to some of the content that we provided, because we would always recommend getting an expert opinion on something before you make appeals mistakes. The more mistakes you make in the appeals process, it kind of creates additional hurdles. It means longer review times at Amazon. If you're confusing them with different types of appeals, it means you're losing more money over more days or weeks. And it could actually really hurt your ability to get the issue resolved at all, depending on how many mistakes you make.
Okay, now don't go anywhere. Chris and I are about to join in live to answer all of your questions. But first, make sure to check out the written version of this webinar over on the Jungle Scout blog. We'll put this link down in the live chat, in the video description, and in the comments of this video. Make sure to check it out. It's our ultimate guide for how to avoid suspensions and get reinstated. Now, let's get into the live Q&A. All right, now it wouldn't be a Jungle Scout webinar without a live Q&A, so thank you guys for joining in. Hopefully we'll be able to answer all of your questions today. Chris, thanks for jumping back in and willing to answer some questions today. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Sorry, Chris, I just realized I had you muted on my side. You should be able to hear me now, right?
I can hear you, yep.
Okay, awesome. Well, for those that are watching live right now, go ahead and drop all of your questions in the live chat. For those watching the replay, go ahead and drop your questions in the comments and we'll be able to get to those. But also I would say stay tuned because there's a good chance that Chris will answer your question if you're watching the replay. But for now, let's get into the Q&A, and I already see a few questions trickling on in. So Chris, I got a good question here from Brandy. Brandy is asking, how can sellers differentiate between innocent oversights and malicious attacks when facing IP suspensions? That's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully if you're a established brand owner on Amazon, you've got an IP attorney when you were setting this all up, when you're registering your trademark. So things have been set up properly so that you're not vulnerable to somebody picking apart your IP. If you suddenly have a competitor who notices that you don't have your trademark properly registered, or you haven't, whatever it might be, your design or patent rights haven't been adequately set up, that creates an avenue of attack for them, right? Mm-hmm. So those are the easy things to just make sure if you didn't do it when you set up the account or when you set the brand up, you get expert intellectual property eyes on it now to make sure you clean that up before you get attacked. If you do have all of that set up and you're still getting attacked, take a look at the types of behaviors that your attacker or your competitor might be throwing at you. It could be something they've done before to somebody else. Maybe they've already had their wrist slapped from that brand, that seller reporting them. Maybe you've had to report them before and they're coming back to the well with the same kind of tactics, which actually kind of helps in a way, because that might mean that they've been punished before for the same thing, makes them like in the re-offender bucket, and it makes Amazon more likely to take a bigger, more permanent action against them. So in the long run, I mean, of course, in the short run, it's painful and annoying. In the long run, it might be better because you have a stronger case to make for them to be removed from the platform. And Amazon itself should also be interested in kicking off bad actors. They shouldn't act like you're a nuisance for reporting valid abuse.
Yeah.
They should be interested in getting rid of those people too, because it saves them time and money as well. So even if they don't act that interested in the damage it creates to your account or your business, they should, even for selfish reasons, be interested in removing any bad players that don't want to play by the rules.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like a lot of sellers, and for good reason, do think, Amazon's out against them all the time because they've only experienced the bad parts of working with Amazon,
Yeah.
especially just going through seller support. A lot of people have negative experiences there, but you make a great point. Amazon wants you to succeed as sellers. That's why they give us new tools, even if it's slowly being rolled out, and they give us new data or more data. They want us to be better because when we thrive, they thrive. So that's a really great point there. Another question here for you is, how should sellers compile evidence of potential competitor abuse? Now, real quick, just for those that may have missed it, in the very beginning, I think, Chris, you mentioned how this is a really important tactic. Even if you might not use it now, it's really important to collect information on your competitors, really just monitor all of your competitors really throughout the year so that when something does happen, you're on top of it and you're able to see if there's a trend in the people that are reporting you, or also you are able to report them. So, what do you think about this question here? How should sellers compile evidence of their competitors?
Try to get as much info as you can on if they're buying from you. Sometimes Amazon has more data than you do, and you can point them in the right direction. We had an exact same negative review from the same party or from what appears to be a related party 6 months ago. I mean, sometimes the wording is identical in the negative review. Give them a thread to pull on, give them something like a homework assignment. If it's something that you can't see, address info, messaging directly with Amazon, whatever it might be. Maybe they complained that they didn't get a refund. Maybe they complained that the product isn't the same quality as what they bought before. It could be any kind of, complaint about the item or about you. There could be a good paper trail that Amazon can review that you don't have eyes on. So at least steer them in the direction. Last April, we had the same thing, the same kind of complaint. Sometimes competitors are really sloppy when they try to attack another brand. They'll use like the same service that they hired to attack you last time, and that service might be a little sloppy or lazy. They might use the same accounts. They might use the same language. I can't tell you how many bad reviews. I mean, one thing sellers tell us a lot these days is Amazon won't remove these negative reviews that we know are bogus or fake. And sometimes just a quick look, you can see that the same exact phrases were used a few months ago, and just highlight that to them. They might not have looked. They might have good data that they're not paying the right type of attention to, or they didn't take the time, like they know where to look, but they didn't take the time to do it. So you can help them along by pointing out stuff that are consistent clusters of data. Hey, we got hit right before Prime Day last year. Looks like we're being hit right before Prime Day. And it looks like a lot of the negative reviews or a lot of the demands for returns, or let's just say buyer complaints, we're meeting the same pattern, the same criteria, right, as the last time. Not everyone is using sophisticated tactics to go after their competitors. Some people, just to give another example, are putting all their time and effort into trying to get your detail page taken down and suspended by tucking in illicit keywords on the back end, trying to make ASIN contributions, maybe through vendor central loopholes that we've talked about before, or just trying to add keywords that are going to reference illegal substances or things, illegal terms that do not belong on an Amazon detail page, let's put it that way, knowing that ASIN contribution won't be immediately detected as, oh, this is a competitor trying to make a contribution that's just going to get this listing flagged. I mean, maybe someday in the future, their automation or their AI will be smart enough to detect that and to identify the source. As it is right now, it's kind of up to you to point them in that direction and say, no, somebody's tucked in some illicit back-end keywords. This is an obvious abuse attack. I mean, the good news now is a lot of these attacks, like the tactics are known to Amazon 2-3 years ago. They didn't even know about this stuff. So you had to explain it A to Z. Now you can kind of say, oh, illicit back-end keyword attack, and at least they have the ability to hit the ground running with it.
In your experience, Chris, what's like the success rate of this? Like when you do find the evidence and you feel like you have a good case, is there still a chance that Amazon is not going to believe you or take that same leap of faith with you? What is your success rate usually with these things?
Oh, I mean, it entirely depends on your strategy and how you approach it. Your success rate will be very low if all you do is call account health and complain and ask them for advice, or open seller support cases, or use the report a violation tool,
Right.
or just writing basic emails to Jeff at Amazon. This is why that big case that was in the news recently, I think it was in an article in Bloomberg about the bad review for diapers that led to Amazon wouldn't remove the review. That review could have been removed a lot quicker and without national media attention. Not everyone's going to get national media attention on every fake review, or if it's a legit review, a review that's based on an Amazon mistake with your inventory. That can be fixed if you escalate it appropriately, but also early and often, not waiting 6 weeks and then writing an escalation email after waiting 4 weeks after writing Jeff. I mean, that's the wrong way to do it. So these can definitely be fixed. If Amazon really digs in their heels and says, nope, I don't care where you go, how loud you scream, we're not going to remove this review. There are outside of Amazon resources that you can go to say, look, this is obviously a fake review. Amazon has a duty to remove fake reviews, or it's an illegitimate review because Amazon didn't do something, not any fault of the buyer.
Right.
The buyer's correct, but Amazon screwed up here.
Right.
You can pursue external resources, whether it's local representation, government, the FTC, whatever it might be. There are solutions to that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, and so it sounds like it's not just what you say, it's how you say it as well. You mentioned like there's certain avenues for getting your message across. So it's kind of two different things you have to balance there.
And resisting the urge to embrace a lot of the misinformation that's out there on the forums or in different other YouTube posts or videos, where people are saying, here's a template, this shows you're angry, this shows you're hurting financially, this shows Amazon screwed up, whatever it might be. Spam it everywhere. Spam it to this person, that person, that person. The spam approach rarely works. I think this is one reason that some escalations aren't heard and appreciated by Amazon that should be. It's because a lot of your colleagues as sellers are spamming some of these people with invalid content. If they see that you're sending the same generic template, and this goes for reinstatement appeals as well, if they see that you're spamming this stuff all over the company, not only are you harming your own odds of successful resolution, you're harming every other seller out there. You're kind of working against the community. So spamming doesn't, I know it's tempting, don't get me wrong. I know when you're desperate, when you're panicking, that writing only one thing and spending the rest of your day figuring out where you can send it is a very tempting prospect, but that's not going to help you.
Yeah, and then one more tip as well that you already covered in the webinar, but just to kind of double emphasize it here, is you said to do whatever it takes to speak to a US-based representative. Whatever team you're going through, assuming you are English speaking and you sell in the United States, speak to somebody that also can understand you, versus what's typical of like another support call center that's outside of the country.
It can do more harm than good when you speak with, I know I pick on account health reps, but any team where they're basically reading from a script, or they're just regurgitating what they told the last person, even if your cases aren't analogous. And you can usually tell, maybe not the first or second time you do it, but by the 5th or 10th or 15th call on that or a number of issues, you can probably tell if they don't know what they're talking about. Your odds of getting somebody who knows what they're talking about are much higher speaking with a US rep, and the US teams don't have nearly the amount of turnover that some of the overseas teams have. Those teams have high turnover for a whole host of reasons we don't have time to get into.
Yeah.
But they're just not, they're not going to help you achieve your goal. And it's a waste of time. You could have spent that time doing something else, right? So.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Awesome. Good deal there. Let's move on to another question here. Brandy's asking, what should be emphasized in an escalation to justify the need for reinstatement? So this is after you get suspended or shut down, wherever the case is, and now you're actually just begging Amazon to reinstate your account. What should you emphasize in that escalation?
Factual information, data, how many appeals have been ignored, how many weeks you've been down, how many places you've escalated it. This assumes that your escalations were worth reading and valid, worth reviewing. It's kind of hard to bang your fist on the table if you've been sending in a lot of subpar appeals, or if you're admitting fault in places where you should be disputing whether or not there were any mistakes made. I mean, if you're not buttoned up on your side, then of course it's tougher to escalate or to justify an escalation. But all other things being equal, assuming you've got that down, make sure that you've justified their time, their attention on the escalation with how much money you've lost because they haven't held up their end, because they haven't shown any evidence that they've reviewed something properly. Or even if you've called account health, and the account health reps often will say, you know what, there's nothing really here that indicates why they took this decision, why they took this action, or why they made this decision, or why they're denying an appeal, or why they're not listening to your reporting a competitor's abuse. That probably means it wasn't properly handled, and no one really noticed that it wasn't properly handled, which alone on its own is justification for an escalation. Or if you're just not getting any responses at all. People have to, these days at least, have to escalate when they don't, they just get nothing back, when there's nothing but silence. And it's like you haven't even had an answer, or they give you a non-answer answer, like we're still reviewing it. I mean, sometimes people come to us 6 weeks of answers saying we're still reviewing it.
Wow.
That generally means there's no review actually happening. And they're just trying to get that email out of the queue before it matures and ages and they miss their SLAs or the KPIs. They're really just trying to answer a message for the sake of answering it.
Yeah, it's always so frustrating when, one, you get sent to another team, so you know there's going to be some time delay there, but then that team says, hey, there's going to be a time delay. It takes 48 hours for this action to happen or for this review to happen. And time is money when you're suspended, when you're losing out on potentially thousands of dollars in profit per day. I mean, yeah, time is money. So if you can, sounds like, escalate further, you don't have to wait, from what it sounds like, to hear back before you can write again or message again.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Very much.
Good stuff there. Move on to the next question here. This question is, what precautions should be taken when granting account access to employees at third parties? This is a good topic that I don't know if we talked too much about in the main.
No, we didn't. I had it on my original roster of tips to advise.
We should have done 26 tips.
I know. That's why I said I had a few extras. This is one of them to throw in today because, and that does sometimes wind up on the cutting room floor on some of these videos because it seems so basic or straightforward. Like, have best practices around who can access your account so you're not looking related to another, like a service provider or somebody's accessing multiple accounts. I mean, that becomes a problem because people are granting without thinking about it. I guess that's still as much of a problem as before, related accounts that only appear related. Somebody looks like they're related to another seller, but their only relationship is through a third-party service provider who maybe they used a VPN, maybe they didn't, but whatever happened made you look related to their customer.
Right.
And your only relation to that seller is through the service provider. You don't know who they are. That's why you typically talk to sellers who are like, Amazon told me I'm related to ABC XYZ. I've never heard of them. Well, you haven't heard of them because, of course you've never heard of them. You have no idea who they are. The service provider that you granted access to, it's their customer. Their customer got suspended for God knows what reason. If you don't even know the seller, you're certainly not going to know why they're suspended. It's really awkward to have those conversations with the service provider. Do you know these guys? Do you know what they're suspended for? Do you know if they're getting reinstated anytime soon? Because that would certainly help us. We see things like that. We also see people who, for some reason, are sharing their primary user access. So, like, I still get calls and emails from people who say, I'm going to give you my credentials. I want you to sign into my account and tell me what's going on. I will never, ever use your credentials to access your account. That's just going to make Amazon think your account's been compromised. It's going to make them think you're whatever, related to multiple other sellers, lots of other problems. So no one that sells on Amazon, I understand newer sellers aren't as familiar, but this is just basic account security stuff that you should be also doing, like with your banking information and anything else you'd use out in online access, because online access security procedures, because you need to create unique user permissions. You don't want to share your credentials with anybody, and you want to make sure that they don't look like they're some bad or foreign actor who's jumping on your account. Random IP addresses that pop up sometimes get flagged. You're giving seller performance, my former teams, the opportunity to misinterpret what they're seeing on their screen. And if it's a lower tier, lower level staffer who doesn't really know this stuff, sometimes to be on the safe side, they'll scramble your password, sanitize your account, kick you out of it temporarily. I mean, what if that happens during like Prime Day? It might take them 24 hours to restore your access. You might have a bunch of back and forth messages, emails, whatever, all because you started giving random people access to your account at the worst possible time. So have a very ironclad step-by-step process for that, where you're creating unique user access for them. And also, finally, if you're no longer working with that employee, that service, whatever, the day that you stop working with them, get their access removed. You don't need to have that linger for an extra day. That's too much risk.
Totally. Yeah. It's so important to have those SOPs and best practices written down, ideally somewhere. When X happens, Y and Z need to follow. You did mention early in the webinar, in the main portion of the webinar, when someone goes out of town for vacation, and that's the person that usually jumps in and answers your seller-related questions in Seller Central, you need to make sure you have an SOP or best practice in place to where someone can replace that person or know kind of what they need to do and the responsibilities already set up. So I think that's really important and expands past what to do when someone like just temporarily leaves a company, but when they actually do leave the company, maybe it's monthly also, you have these SOPs. Yeah, that's a really great question and an awesome answer to that as well.
I've also seen a lot of business owners telling us we either had a service doing something and they had no idea what the service is doing on their behalf, or the employee, and maybe employees don't always want to ask questions if they think that like they're asking too many, or that they're afraid of being wrong, or they're afraid that the Amazon account owner will say, I've already told you this, you shouldn't be asking me this again, whatever it is, like almost like rogue employees doing things that get the account shut down. It could be as easy as like answering customer service. You brought up like nights and weekends coverage.
Yeah.
A lot of customer service reps are getting the whole account in trouble for how they answer customer queries over a weekend, where they'll say something like, oh, I'll offer you a refund. I'm sorry you had a bad experience. By the way, it looks like you left us a 1-star review. Now that I've refunded you, can you change that to a nicer review? Complete violation of TOS. And they might just be doing it because they don't know any better. But it's tough to explain that to Amazon, because then it made the account owner look like they weren't taking any precautions. They don't have any training. They don't have a robust SOP. All of the things you end up needing anyway if you have to appeal for an account suspension, you could avoid by just telling your employees like the entire account health is at stake when you deal with this kind of problem or that kind of problem. So if it comes up, whether it's the middle of the night or middle of a weekend or whatever, we're going to have a contingency plan where you can ask somebody who's better trained, or somebody who's got immediate access to our compliance procedures to make sure, because it's better to ask than to go ahead and do something and assume, this is okay. I already know from working on these cases what Amazon is unhappy about or happy about. I can handle this myself. Then you're putting the entire fate of the account in the hands of a lower tier employee, which is not a knock on entry-level employees at all. Right. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, like, you as the owner of the account have to put in their hands the tools to succeed. Otherwise, you're opening up the door to potential failures.
Definitely. That's awesome. Well, good stuff. I believe that is the last question in the live chat here. But again, if you have any more questions, you can feel free to drop them in the comments of this video. And also, Chris, where can anyone find you? I know you mentioned your support email in the main portion of the webinar, but where can people find you if they have more questions?
Yeah, I mean, you can also use my direct email, Chris, CHRIS at ecommercechris.com. I give the support at ecommercechris email address because obviously there's several people looking at those messages. My inbox, there's only a few people. But the bottom line is, if it's extremely urgent, you want to email us. You were listening into this, you were live, you were watching the recording, whatever it might be. Mention Jungle Scout in the subject line, and say, hey, this happened to me, or I read, listened to whatever the content. This is something that's costing me a lot of money, and this is something I need a quick response on, because I do like seeing messages where people start the response with, thank you for getting back to me so quickly. This is one thing that we're really known for, is quick response times. Even nights and weekends, it's not that difficult for me to see an email come in, understand what it's about, understand the potential damage, and get back to you with a high-level response, not a, thank you for writing to me. We take your request very seriously. We will get back to you very shortly. That canned response stuff for what we do is not satisfying, right? You want to get a response that indicates, yes, we've seen this before. Yes, we know how to fix it. I need A, B, and C from you. Once you get me that information, I can get back to you with, a higher grade response and maybe some suggestions. So
that's awesome. Perfect. Well, you know where to find them. And real quick, before we head out, I just want to plug our next webinar real quick, guys. We just launched, if you haven't heard, Jungle Scout just launched a new tool called Competitive Intelligence. And I'll, give you a little sneak peek here. This is kind of what the overview page looks like here. And we have an awesome official launch webinar happening end of the month or beginning of next month. In a couple weeks, soon. And so if you go to junglescout.com and you head over to resources, you'll see a link here for the webinars. We can access all the webinars, and you can even get the replays of older webinars as well. You can go ahead and sign up or register for this one. And that is going to be, just a huge, huge webinar. We already have a ton of attendees scheduled for it already. So make sure to get your hands dirty on this tool, and make sure to check out that webinar coming up in a few weeks. But until then, I hope you guys enjoyed this webinar, got a lot of value out of it. Chris, thank you so much for being part of the main portion, and obviously coming back now for the live Q&A. It's been awesome.
Anytime. Looking forward to the next one.
Absolutely. Well, cool. Until next time, guys, we will see you later. Take care.